G-Man Boxing. Do you know what I mean? Every single live he donates. I see him on other lives donating. He's got the bag on it.
Alright people, review of the week time. So let's start this off with the card that happened last night. We'll talk about Chisora Pulev. What next for Chisora? Personally, I hope it's retirement, but we'll talk about the whole card in a nutshell. Now I gotta say, everything that could have gone wrong with this card this week did go wrong. I mean, literally, where do we start? So obviously Fabio Wardley, he fought Chris Healy. That wasn't meant to be the original opponent. I forget the guy's name, but people were telling me that the guy he was fighting was useful, and it would have been interesting to see how Wardley would have done. Obviously he fought this guy Chris Healy, who just literally looked like the type of guy who was helping to set up the stage. You know, one of the guys who brings the equipment in, and they just kind of gave him a little tap on the back and said, "Do you want an extra couple of grand? Take your shirt off, actually put it back on, and go in there and fight Fabio Wardley." That's what it looked like there. Obviously the Felix Cash, which I'll talk about now in a second, because Felix Cash was meant to fight Von Alexander on this card. That was meant to be quite high up the card as well. They weighed in, and on the morning of the fight, Felix Cash pulled out with an illness, didn't specify what it was. Few people questioned the validity of that. That's another fight off this card. Then the fight I was personally looking forward to most, the Israel Majamov fight. How does that end? Ends in a flipping head clash. It was a bad cut. It was deep and it was bleeding profusely on Michael Sora. And then that fight ends as a technical decision, a la the Josh Warrington card, the Josh Warrington fight when he fought Lara. Crazy. And again, that was a similar fight where it looked like it was going one way. Like it looked like Majamov was taking control in the second round, and then boom, this happens in the literally straight first meaningful exchange in the third round. That happens. So thank God we had a good fight in the main event, and it was a fun fight. It did make the card, it did help save the card. Now, it really caught fire in the second half. That's when it really caught fire. The first half was kind of alright, it was better than the first fight, but the second half was when Chisora Pulev really caught fire. I seen a lot of people in the live say that they felt Pulev won, and not just that he won it by quite a wide margin. Now, personally, I thought that Chisora did enough to nick it. I've always been someone who tends to favour the aggressor. For the most part, I kind of tend to look at that and give that a little bit more of a, okay, he's being the aggressor. I tend to favour that a bit more. But when I look at Pulev, I saw someone who was struggling at times to pull the trigger, but he was also struggling he had Chisora there with very slow head movement, and he was struggling to land. This wasn't like, Floyd Mayweather head movement from Chisora. It was quite slow, and anyone with a bit of freshness in him would have been able to, find Chisora not too much trouble. So Pulev looked a shadow of himself. The question is for both guys, what do they do? For Pulev, wouldn't shock me if he carries on. I would imagine that Pulev is, how old is he now? 41 years old. Jesus, I didn't realise he was that old. 41 years old. Crazy. I would imagine for Kubrat Pulev now at this stage in his career, if it's not retire, it's someone like Frank Warren offering a big payday to Kubrat Pulev to go in there and fight Joe Joyce, because he's there for the taking. He really is. As for Chisora, when he walked to the ring with Elvis Presley, he had his kids there, and he says the first time he ever brought them to the ring, it did seem to me that this was, without saying it, this was the end. This was the see you later boxing. One last ring walk, savor the moment, and we're gone. However, he stated after the fight that he wants to fight Deontay Wilder. Oh boy. Eddie Hearn on what's next. He said he wants Deontay Wilder. He likes Dylan White 3. Said there's Areola. Areola, take that. Or Kalnaki. That was the original opponent. Well, that was the original fight they were talking about, not the original opponent. But that fight didn't happen. And again, I like that fight. Deontay Wilder. Please, no. Just no. Dereck Chisora at this stage, just Yeah, Ariola, Kalnacki. Personally, I'd like to see him retire, but those fights, yeah, I can see them happen. I can see them being a bit of fun. Both guys are past it. Even Dylan White. Yeah, Dylan White's punch resistance is gone, but he's not shot to pieces. At least I don't think he is. It doesn't look that bad. Even I wouldn't like to see Chisora in there with. But Deontay Wilder? Oh, God, no. Oh, just no. It's very rare that I agree with Tony Bellew. But when he said after the fight, when they mentioned Deontay Wilder, he just said, I don't want to see that. And one of the very few times I agree with him, I 100% agree there. I don't want to see it. I think the majority of people don't want to see it. Chisora really should. He's made more from boxing than many fighters with way more ability than him have made. He has taken... He's got the bag out of boxing. He really has. He's got the bag out of boxing, and honestly, I think he needs to call it a day. Just in my opinion, I think he needs to call it a day before he ends up hurting himself. Because I think now he's slower, he's easier to hit, he doesn't take a shot as good. I don't want to see him getting stretched out. So I'm hoping that that's the case, that he maybe decides to call it a day. In terms of some of the other fights that were on over the weekend, obviously there was the card in Russia, obviously in which Patrick Teixeira fought the guy. I struggle to pronounce this guy's name. I really do. I really do struggle to pronounce his name. But I know this was his first fight since his... And I'm going to say it. I felt it was his controversial win over Liam Smith. Kuranov. So he got a win over Liam Smith in May of last year. I personally felt Liam Smith did enough to win that fight. But in there against Patrick Teixeira, just played into his strengths. Dropped Patrick Teixeira in the first round, beat him on points, and I have to say I like the cards that they do over there in Russia. This was in Ekaterinburg, because if you go on RRC's YouTube channel, 9 times out of 10 when they're putting shows on over there, and a lot of them will have heavyweights and cruiserweights. I mean, this one had heavyweights, 2 cruiserweights, 2 heavyweights, 2 cruiserweights, and super welterweight. They tend to put the big guys in there, and normally you get some good action on it. The commentary is in Russian, so you can't understand a word they say, but nevertheless, it's boxing anyway at the end of the day. So, I think it's RCC on YouTube, they always tend to put them on. That was a good win for him. In terms of some of the news that's been going around, now this I found quite amusing. So, Jake Paul has announced that he is going to be facing Hasim Rahman Jr. So, Tommy Fury is out, Hasim Rahman Jr. is in. Now, I went and watched his fight against... was it James... No, it's not that. Tommy Morrison's son. We'll just call him that. Tommy Morrison's son, right? And both guys looked absolutely horrible. But the way Rahman just folded from one... And the right hand that he got stopped with and knocked him out on his feet almost, it didn't look... Well, he did end up going down face first. It didn't look like one of them shots where, you could see it and think, oh, that looked powerful. It landed, but it didn't look mad powerful. So I would say he's a similar level to Jake Paul. Maybe Jake Paul has a bit more athleticism, to be honest with you. So the two of them are going to fight on August the 6th. If I'm home, we'll do a watch along for that. Definitely, we'll do a live watch along. I don't know who's showing it in the UK and Ireland. I would imagine it's probably maybe Sky would get the rights to it, but God knows it. One of the bigger players would look. In fact, probably Sky would probably try and get the rights to that, because they do that on pay-per-view. You know them. So that's who he's fighting. But Jake Paul wanted to get the Tommy Fury fight over the line, and he said that he'd be willing to pay $500,000 to Tommy Fury to fight in the UK. To which Tommy Fury said, basically, I wouldn't get out of bed to fight you for $500,000. Let me know when you're ready to have serious conversations. Now, I watched one of Hatman's videos on that, and Hatman made a very good point. He said, how much has Tommy Fury been paid for his first, 9-0? 8-0, 9-0? How much has he been paid for them fights? Has he even managed to make $500,000 in combined purses? Well, I decided, why not do a little bit of digging and just have a quick look and see what kind of money he's made. So Tommy Fury fought in America on the Jake Paul Tyron Woodley undercard back in, I think it was August last year. Look there on screen. £11,000, 15,000 US dollars. That's how much he was paid for that. And he's saying he doesn't get out of bed. He wouldn't get out of bed for 500k, but he's happy to fight a guy in the States for like how much? For 489 grand less. He's happy to go over to the States and fight for that, but he won't get out of bed, as he says, for 500k. I do wonder. Some people were saying to me they reckon Fury, when he pulled out the first time back in December because he was afraid of losing. Tommy Fury is not the type of... Tommy Fury, I get the impression, and look, I've had my criticisms of Campbell Hatton and of Conor Benn, and my criticisms of both of them. I have my criticisms of Conor Benn in terms of how they're being very, very slow with him, how they're selling these, washed over champions as legitimate fights. I've criticised about Campbell Hatton in a sense of he's put so high on these big cards where he's got very limited ability. But however, what I won't criticise, and I won't criticise both of them for, is both of them want it. They want to fight. They want to get to the top of boxing. With Tommy Fury, I get the impression that he just wants fame. That's all he wants. He just wants his bit of fame, his Love Island fame. He wants let's look at it like this. He's kind of like, if you talk about like a medieval term, you have the king who's leading his knights into battle. You have on the side of him the dukes, who you'd say is John Fury and Shane. And then you have the guy who shovels the horse shit. And that's Tommy Fury basically saying, well, I'm just as important as everyone else. If someone wasn't here to look after the horses, there'd be no one to go into battle. That's kind of how I see Tommy Fury, does it? Because he's not a good fighter. He's not going to reach any major heights in boxing, I don't think. And he just strikes me as someone who just wants to cash in on whatever fame he can get. Whereas those two, Hatton and Benn, they might not be the most talented, and certainly in Campbell Hatton's case, he's not. But you can't deny that both those fighters want to fight. They want to try and make the most of whatever their ability is. With Tommy Fury, again, I don't see that. I see someone who just wants to make money and get famous. That's it. And he'd be happy to... But wasn't there a rumour going around when he was like 1-0 or 2-0 that after his success on Love Island he was done with boxing? And this is a guy who's been pro now for 4 years? Maybe 4 years? Has it been 4 years? Just getting around then. And he's only had a couple of fights. He's never stepped it up. A lot of them fighters he's fought haven't even... Not to say they haven't had winning records. They haven't even had wins, period, on their record. So for Tommy Fury to go around saying, I won't get out of bed and fight you for less than for 500k, you'll fight that, what was the guy's name? Anthony Thompson or something like that for 11 grand? But you won't fight Jake Paul for 500? Really? And Jake Paul's saying he'll go to the UK? Right. In terms of other news that's been going on, it looks likely now that Josh Taylor, we are actually going to get to see Josh Taylor versus Jack Catrell. He says, I'm going to punish him this time. I'm going to knock him out and put him flat on his back. I'm going there to outbox and beat him up and knock him out. So we are likely to get to see that fight, probably the back end of this year. It seems likely that it's probably going to be on Sky again. In fact, definitely be on Sky. I'm not too unhappy about that fight. I do feel as though Jack Catrell deserves a rematch. And I do feel like Josh Taylor, there'll always be that hanging over him, if you get me. That like, oh, you didn't give Jack Catrell his rematch. Why didn't you give Jack Catrell his rematch? And look, Jose Cepeda's a good fight. Jose Ramirez, a rematch with him would have also been a good fight, stuff like that. But I think that he needs to fight Jack Catrell. I do. It's a shame it's not for Undisputed. I do feel Jack Catrell, that moment should have been his. Do I think he'll beat Josh Taylor this time around? I'm going to be honest and say no. I have to be honest. And the reason I say no is that was probably the worst I've ever seen Josh Taylor. That's the worst I've ever seen him as a pro. And you would have to say that Josh Taylor has many more gears to go through. Jack Catrell may as well. You never know. But I suspect that was the best of Jack Catrell in that fight. I don't think he had more gears to go through. I could be wrong, but I don't think there was. Whereas Josh Taylor, we know he is a better fighter than what we saw that night. We know it. Now, Josh Taylor should not have won that fight. Jack Catrell should have. But this time around, I do think Josh Taylor will win. I think he'll win it legitimately this time. Do I think he'll stop Jack Catrell? Jack Catrell appears to be tough, but if we see a much improved Josh Taylor, I think he's winning this fight on points. Now, it was only last week there was talk of a Strata Chocolatito 3 in November, but Eddie Hearn has stated he'd like to do Bam Rodriguez versus Chocolatito in December. And Eddie Hearn, you have to big him up for this. You have to big him up for this. For the smaller divisions, the smaller weight classes, Eddie Hearn and DAZN have been doing excellent work, getting the likes of Bam Rodriguez out to the wider public. You know, showing fights and getting fights like Estrada Chocolatito. You know, getting Estrada versus, Rodriguez versus Shwisa Getso in the main event of these cards. It's great for the lower weight divisions. HBO started doing something similar near the end of their run in boxing when they were doing them Superfly shows. And the super flyweight division, well, actually, like, I don't really watch a lot of the minimum weight, which is 105 pounds, but 108, there is some seriously good fighters in that division, as is the case in flyweight. I mean, Nakatani, and even if Bam Rodriguez went down to flyweight, because he came up from light fly, and then you have Superfly. I mean, it's consistent through the years. Consistent, and it's consistently good, those weight divisions. And they're criminally underrated. I think some people, it's the fact that, like, maybe there's not as big a punchers in that weight division. And yeah, you certainly don't get as many big punchers in those divisions, I'll admit that. But the skill, the speed, everything, I mean, you very rare you'll look at 108, 112 and 115 pounds, 117 pounds as well, and see a dull fight. Very, very, very rare. And by the way, I forgot to mention, Mark Macedo lost to Ray Vargas last night. Now, I didn't see that fight yet, but I really did think Macedo would win that fight. Now, I heard he had Ray Vargas down in that fight, and I know Ray Vargas has been boxing in his fights a lot more. I remember early on in his career, he was knocking a lot of guys out. He's not had a knockout in 5 or 6 years now. But I'll have to have a look at Macedo versus Vargas, definitely. But in terms of another fight that I'd like here, is that Eddie Hearn has revealed that they've been in touch with Sonny Edwards about the possibility of making Julio Cesar Martinez versus Sonny Edwards unification in October. Please, Eddie, make that fight. I like that fight. I think Sonny Edwards has a great chance against Martinez. Although saying that, Martinez at flyweight, it'll be a lot more comfy at that weight. But Martinez is not the most reliable fighter. He's not the most reliable. He's pulled out of fights on short notice. He's come in heavy at fights as well, like against Chocolatito. Now, to be fair, he took that fight on very short notice. He did. I think it was like 5 weeks notice. So he probably didn't have the weight cut down to a T. But nevertheless, I mean, you know, you would imagine you would take a fight if you knew you were on point with weight. And bear in mind, that was at Superfly. This is at flyweight. But if we can get that fight made, I see Sonny Edwards is very live in that fight, very live. Vasyl Lomachenko was declared. He is now ready to fight again. He's talked to Todd DeBurr from Top Rank, and he said he'll be looking to get a fight in October. Obviously, he could have fought Kambosos. He didn't. He had his own situation over in his home country of what's going on there. But now, excuse me, now he is ready to go again. And Lomachenko, always a great addition to any division. One of my favourite fighters to watch. So hopefully we will get to see Lomachenko back sometime soon. Some news today where Tyson Fury, and you see, here's the thing, that's why I'm not going to do a video. I don't do videos on this. I only talk about it in like my reviews. Tyson Fury said he's willing to come out of retirement to fight Anthony Joshua, but only if it's at Wembley Stadium and free for the UK fans. So you see like the contradictions there. He wants 500 mil to fight Alexander Usyk a few weeks ago, and then he wants to fight AJ at Wembley Stadium for free. You see, I just laugh because like when AJ will like contradict himself and will say something one minute and say something the next, that's really out of character for AJ. So I'd make a video on that and being like, I wonder what's going on in AJ's head, because he's saying one thing one minute and saying something the next. But then they'll be like, well, Fury said he'll fight Usyk for $500 million last week, and now he says he'll fight AJ for free this week. That's in Fury's character. That's just that is the way Tyson Fury is. He says one thing one week and one the next. He's always contradicting himself. It's in his nature. So when he does it, I don't really make heads or tails of it. When someone like Anthony Joshua does it, I'm like, well, that's a bit out of character. That's a bit weird. I'll look a bit more into that, because it's not in his nature. Like, very seldom you'll see Anthony Joshua say one thing 1 minute and one thing the next and contradict himself, like he did in that interview with Coogan back last year before the Usyk fight was signed, where he said, I won't take step aside money. Under no circumstance will I take it. And then I think Coogan said, oh, but if it's a big enough offer. Well, if it's a big enough offer, we'll have to think about it. Well, you said you wouldn't take it. I know I wouldn't take it. But if it's a big enough offer, we'll think about it. And it's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? So, whereas Fury, you know, something like that, I wouldn't pay heads or tails of it. It's just what he does. He always says one thing 1 week and something the next. Errol Spence on the negotiations for Terence Crawford. I mean, it's closer than it's ever been. If it don't happen now, it's never going to happen. Don't say that. It's way closer than it used to be. I definitely think it's going to happen. Please let that fight happen. Spence versus Crawford this year, undisputed. Please let that fight happen. More than anything do I want to see that fight. More than I want to see Alexander Usyk Tyson Fury or AJ Tyson Fury, I want to see Crawford Spence. Eddie Hearn has also claimed that Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua rematch is his last fight with his co-promotional deal with Alexander Usyk. Usyk's promoted by K2, it's the Klitschko's. So win or lose, he will be one of the biggest free agents in boxing, because the Klitschko's and K2 don't put on as many shows as they used to. They used to promote Triple G. They promoted some others as well. I think they promoted Garcia for a while. They don't do as many shows now, and certainly not nowadays, as they used to. But Usyk and K2, I mean, they're kind of like a package deal, but Usyk can kind of fight on with other promoters as well. And it's also been announced, obviously, during the week that Sky reportedly have won the rights to show AJ versus Usyk on pay-per-view in the UK, beat the Zone, AJ's last fight with Sky, and potentially, last fight with Sky, because thereafter it'll be on the Zone. So if he loses, I mean, Jesus, be a lot of grey hairs in the Zone during that fight, I'll tell you that. But my thoughts on that, I'm just curious to see how much they charge for it, because at the end of the day, for Sky, they may look at this fight and think, well, if AJ loses, I mean, we've cashed out at the right time. And I hope to God Sky, do I think they will? I wouldn't put it past them, because Sky are just absolutely, they are one of the worst organisations. Just the way they've gone over the years is disgraceful. And even though things are really expensive now and the cost of everything is going up, would not shock me if they charged 30 quid for that pay-per-view. Like, imagine that, right? When AJ fought Ruiz on the first fight, it was 20 quid. He may be fighting Usyk in a rematch now and it may be 30. It's definitely not going to be 20. 25 minimum, 30 maximum. Could you imagine? I hope that's not the case. I hope I'm wrong about that. And I don't like sounding negative about things like that, but for Sky, I'm sure they're looking at AJ and thinking, we're cashing you out. This is our last fight with you. We are going to make sure we see that money. And I would not shock me if Smith and Sky are thinking that. Wouldn't shock me in the slightest. So people, I'm going to leave it there. I think I've rambled on long enough, and I think I've touched on everything I really wanted to talk about in here. Some people were asking about Conor Benn potentially fighting Eubank Jr. He was at the fights there the other night, and I don't know. I'm racking my brain trying to think who they're actually going to announce for him next. They are obviously going to step him up, that of which I've no doubt, but who? I reckon it's either going to be Avanesian or Hooker. Probably Hooker more than likely, probably the easier fight to make, but I'm racking my brain here. People are saying Eubank. Not going to be Eubank. He's not going to fight Eubank. There's no point. It makes no sense. You know, just for Conor Benn, it makes no sense. And Eubank, Liam Smith with Sky now, I think we know what's happening there. So that's my thoughts on that. So for now, I will leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed the video, people. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. People, I'll talk to you.